Hi, I'm Tom at Ledgmere, and I'm dressed a little bit differently today than I normally would be. It's just been one of those days. So a couple tools that'll be super handy. This showed up here. It's made by Cider, and what it is it's flexible drain tool, and you can fold it in all kinds of different ways. You can fold it, this is the way it came in the thing. You can fold it into a funnel like this. You can fold it this way, make a little gutter pipe out of it, and this was what I wanted to use with the triangle drain pan, was to kind of have it this, and then I could tuck it under there and it would just fold in by itself. But we'll save that for another video when I actually have all the parts that I want to use and show you. But this came in. This is pretty cool. Again, the 3/4 inside diameter plastic or rubber pipe is good, and this right here is a 74 to 76 millimeter oil filter wrench, and this was a John Deere one, but I'm sure there are other varieties too. There's the strap wrenches. This is just one that I like because it goes on the end, and it takes a 3/8 drive socket. So here we go. You always want to run your tractor for a couple minutes to warm the oil up. When it's cold, it doesn't flow quite as well, so you want to run that tractor for just a couple minutes to get it up to temperature, and then park it. And then just be careful, because the oil in the engine will be hot, particularly the exhaust, so be careful of that. And then we can go ahead and get our oil change started. I'm going to do an oil change today on my neighbor's tractor. It's a Cub Cadet XT2 SLX50, which the 50 is the 50-inch fabricated deck. The XT2 is the dealer version of the Enduro series. You can't find this version at the box store, and I've done a review on this tractor, and it's a pretty good machine. What kind of surprises me now is they've got several different types of transmissions. So they actually call the Tough Torque K46 a heavy-duty transmission now, and I find that a little bit funny. But that's another whole story. It's got a Kawasaki motor. That's one of the better points of this tractor. And Cub Cadet, some of the tractors come with Kawasaki's, some come with Kohlers. I think Kohler's a great motor. I think they're both great motors, actually. I've had lots of both. But I'm going to do the oil change today, and we'll try to make this as simple as possible. I know some of you are professional mechanics, and hopefully those of you who are watching have a tractor and you are just watching because you want to learn how to change your oil. So I'm going to make this as simple as possible, as quick as possible, and with the least amount of technical jargon as possible. So the first thing I'm going to do is, because I got this deck and I don't have one of those cute little triangle oil pans, and as you can see, the oil drain is over here. I've got the cap off, and I'm going to show you how that works in a second. I've also got this old piece of 3/4 inch inside diameter hose, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little hose that's going to go from there over to here. And yes, I'll have to hold it on there while it's draining, but it's going to be a lot better than picking up a mess. So I'm just going to take a second and cut this through. Okay, so here's that, and so what I'm going to do is hook this onto here, and next thing I'll do is I'll get this oil drained out, and I'll show you how to do that quickly. One thing I want to show you up quick is here I've got just regular Kohler. This is synthetic engine oil. This is designed for small engines. I've done a lot of reading on small engine oils, and 10W30 for small engines is a little bit different than the 10W30 that you would use in your car. And the reason is that small engines build up a lot of ash, and the zinc helps remove that ash out of your motor. Now, if you don't have anything else, you can use the regular 10W30 that you would use for your car, but it's not a long-term solution, so you want to get back to the small engine oil as quickly as possible. And again, that's just because the small engines, they do build up ash, and the way to get rid of that ash is with zinc. So you don't need a wrench to get this off. If you look right here, you'll see this yellow. Now I've got the cap off, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this on here like that and pull this out at the same time. So as soon as you pull that out, the oil comes out, and this slips right over the top. Here, I usually take the dipstick, and some people take it out. You don't need to really take it out. You can put it somewhere, but as long as you have it disconnected or unscrewed, that will allow it to vent, and then the oil will flow out more freely for you. When we take this off, we're going to be real careful, because what's going to happen is there's going to be still oil in this filter, and we're going to leave this drain hooked up while we do this. And you just want to be careful because there is going to be a little bit of oil in there. So take that off real quick, and you can see that there's some oil there. So again, if I'd have had what I wanted when I was doing this, we wouldn't have had that little bit of a mess, but it's not a biggie. While that oil is still draining, we want to let that finish draining before we go any further, and it might take a few minutes depending on what time of year you do it, but the oil is good and warm, so it shouldn't take too much longer. But in the interim, I want to show you a couple of little things that all my research online has showed me or proven to be correct. So the original oil filter here, 490650721, which replaces the 490657007, and I'll write that down because I said that really quickly. The Kawasaki filter I just took off, exactly the same as the John Deere AM 125424, and the C here just indicates that it came with a kit, so don't pay attention to the C at the end. If you buy the whole oil filter or air filter, the whole shebang tune-up kit with the spark plugs from John Deere, they put a C after this just to indicate that it came with the kit. And then also there's this Stens auto transmission filter here, and that's the part number 120523, which says right here, replaces John Deere AM125. So a lot of you, after a couple of years, you want to find a cheaper filter than the $14 or $15 Cub Cadet filter they're going to charge you for. You can get the Stens filter, which is essentially the same thing. There's all kinds of other filters. There's Fram. There's tons of filters. You can go to your auto parts store and take that number, and they'll come up with something. Generally, what I recommend, however, and this is just a recommendation, is until the warranty has expired on your machine, it doesn't matter what it is, I generally say go to the dealership, buy the oil and filter from them, and pay a little bit extra. That way they've got a record of it on file. They've seen you come in. They know that you've bought the the original equipment manufacturer's parts and pieces, oil filter kits, etc. And then there's no question about what kind of oil you put in it, and if there's ever a warranty issue come up. And that's just a piece of advice from me. So you can take that at face value if you want to. So anyway, I think the oil's done here. Let's go ahead and get the new oil filter on and add some oil back in. One of the neat things about the Cub Cadet lawn tractors is how quickly you can take the hood off to get in there and service everything. All you have to do, first of all, is just unhook this little clip right here that holds the headlights, and then very carefully, you can see there's a groove there. You just lift that out on that side, come to the other side and do the exact same thing. Just be very careful, and it pops right off. We just set this out of the way. Now we've got access to the whole front of the motor. We could get to the spark plugs if we need to, and what we're going to do right now is just service the air filter. The spark plugs we're not going to bother with today. This just pops up, and then you can see the air filter right here. So we have access to the air filter. If you look on the right hand side, there's a little thumb wheel here. So you just take this thumb wheel and you turn it to the left. That loosens up this pipe clamp right here, and then once you've got it loosened up, you can go ahead and pop that air filter right up. If you're mowing a lot of leaves in dirty conditions, I would service this air filter more often than not. There's also a pre-cleaner that you can get to go on this. This one didn't come with one, but it's just a little green pre-cleaner that they're very inexpensive to buy, and I personally like them. You just put a little bit of oil around it, and that will absorb the dust before it gets into your filter. So we're pretty clean, but I'm going to use a vacuum and vacuum this off. What you don't want to do is take compressed air and blow in this way. Taking compressed air and blowing this way is okay, but when you blow air this way, what you're doing is you're actually defeating the purpose of the filter. You're pushing particles through the screen and through the foam on the inside of that filter. So you don't want to do that. You always want to either blow in to push out, or just simply take a vacuum and vacuum this. So I'm going to go ahead and vacuum it, and then I'll be right back. So now we'll just go ahead and put this back on. And then tighten this back up. close that, and that's all there is to it. All right, so we've got the oil all drained out of here pretty good, and so we've got that pushed back in. The oil's stopped draining. Put this cover back on. That, I'll just put this little mess, wipe around this. Go on. Make sure you have a clean surface to mate the new filter onto. So we're going to go into our new oil. Some people use the old oil and they make the seal with the old oil, but I always like to use new oil. And you're just going to put a little bit of oil on this right here, and it makes it work like a suction cup. And so you've got a nice clean and makes a good seal. Now what we do now, and this is kind of a new process for me because I wasn't taught this way, but now you fill it up about half full. If you fill it up too much, you'll end up making a mess. So you fill up about half full, and you go ahead and let that set in there for a couple minutes to soak in. The reason or the thought process behind this is that when you put an empty filter on, it takes a second for the oil pump to build up pressure in the pressurized system. So for a second or two, you're actually running with no oil pressure. And that's why a lot of times when you change the oil, you'll see the oil light come on briefly and then it goes off, and that's, in theory, that's the reason behind it. So I've got a little bit of oil in here, and my oil drain's closed. It's very important that you close that because I've done that before where you start putting oil in and it just comes right back out. So be very, very careful and make sure you've closed that. This is all clean. I've got my mating surfaces lubricated, and we're just going to quickly put that on, and that way you don't get a mess. And so what you don't want to do is you do not want to use the oil filter wrench to put this on, because once it gets under pressure, it actually will bond, and it makes it almost impossible to get it off at some point. So what I do is I get it snug, and then just maybe 1/8 of a turn more, like that, and then we're on. Once we go ahead and get oil in, we'll start the tractor, and we'll run it for a minute, make sure the light goes out, we'll check for leaks, and then we'll go from there. Now this Kawasaki motor here, it specs out at 2 quarts. So I've never in my life been able to get exactly 2 quarts back into something that says it's 2 quarts, because invariably there's always going to be a little bit of old motor oil still in it. And so what we're going to do is go ahead and add 1 quart. I'm going to add about 3/4 of this one, and then we'll check it. It's important to check your owner's manual. Some machines, when they want you to check the oil, they actually want you to back it out and then set it on the top, and so it's not threaded in, and that's how you read it. And some you want to thread them in all the way, like this one. So we'll get that in there, and then we'll pull it back out and see where our oil is sitting. So you can see here that it's between the 3rd and 4th dot here, and I only put 3/4 of a quart in. You don't want to overfill it, because what happens when you overfill a system is it builds up too much pressure, and then you can blow a seal out. So you better have to put a little bit less in than to put too much. What I'm going to do though is I'll put this back in and run the tractor for a moment, turn it back off, check for leaks, and then come back and check the oil again. So this tractor model actually doesn't have an oil pressure indicator light. It does have the what they call the low oil shutoff. So that's kind of a safety measure, but unfortunately by the time it gets to that, it may be too late. You may have done some catastrophic damage to your motor. I don't see any leaks here, so it looks good. I'm going to wipe that off because we've been under pressure, so it's going to shoot some oil up the dipstick. Take it back out again, and see we've dropped down here. We're still within specs though. Personally, I'd rather run it just a little bit low than too high. And yes, we could add a little bit more in here, but we're still on the 2nd instead of over here, so I think it's good. What we'll do is we'll run this for a couple days, couple mowings, or just a couple laps around the yard, then come back and check it again and make sure everything's okay. So one of the last things I want to do before I button this up, and I'm not going to go over greasing the tractor today, but what I do want to go over is, you can see down in there, Right here, this is called a sector and pinion steering. So you've got this sector right here with the pinion, and what that does is that little tiny gear turns the big gear, and that's how you steer it, or how the steering system works. This is the Specialist dry lube. I don't want to use regular grease in there because the regular grease attracts dirt, and then you'll get a grittiness, which actually will cause more or quicker wear than not doing anything. But this is a dry lube, so it's dirt and dust resistant. Some people put silicone in. I don't necessarily recommend silicone. It doesn't really do much for metal to metal. Silicone is more of a rubber protectant, like you'd put on your door seals, or some people spray it on their snow blowers, etc. But it's really not a good metal to metal protectant. So this dry lube right here with Teflon is all that you need in there, and just a little bit of squirt, and that will keep that lubricated. We're doing that because we're already in here. One of the good features of the XT2, XT3 models is that the wheels, they're on the axles there, and they actually have ball bearings, so they're sealed ball bearings, whereas the XT1 and some of the lower price models will actually have a bushing in there, and all a bushing is just a sleeve that sits over the axle, and the wheel runs on it, and it runs in grease, and it's made out of like a pot metal or an aluminum, so after a while that just kind of disintegrates and wears out. But whereas ball bearings are a lifetime solution.